You are listening to the E2C Network, where the Auburn family speaks. War Eagle Auburn family, and welcome back to E2C Extra, the place where we talk about anything that is Auburn related. Honestly, it can be anything. It can be tiddlywinks for all we count. Does anyone even play that game anymore? I don't know. That's a random tangent I just went on. This is the show that's just a bunch of extra Auburn stuff just for you. And so when we get together on these episodes and have a little fun talking about something a little bit unique, not just specifically about sports, I like to bring in interesting characters. And there's no one more interesting out there, especially in his love of all things aesthetics for Auburn, but also history. And that is my good friend Clint Richardson of the Auburn Uniform Database. Clint, what is up?
I don't know if character is a compliment or not.
You can take it for whatever it's worth, sir, and I'm sure whatever I say is not worth that much to you. So, hey, it doesn't really, you don't lose anything, huh? So
it's Thursday at 5:00 Eastern. Like, it probably doesn't mean much right now. So
it honestly doesn't. It's a very weird record time for us. When you and I were doing a regular show together, it would be like 10 o'clock at night after basketball games that we'd be doing recordings. Wasn't that
30 minutes after I left the arena. Yeah,
and you had no voice whatsoever.
Nope. That was fun.
That was always fun, but you had fresh perspectives, so I kind of missed that, a little bit. The good old days, as they call it, Clint. But that's why we get together as often as we can, whether it's on live stream or on shows like this, because as I set up, you are the master of all things Auburn aesthetics, but that kind of ties into it, tradition and history and all those things that are kind of a little bit nebulous out there. But I'd like for us maybe to hone in on a very interesting topic that I think is going to be near and dear to many Auburn fans' heart out there, and that is the topic of Coach Ralph Shug Jordan. Now, are we going to have the debate? Is it Jordan or Jordan here tonight?
No, but we can mention a fun story about that later on.
Okay. Well, yeah, we actually, you know what? We might even lead off with that, but I kind of want to set the table here, as my favorite phrase is on the podcast. What we're doing this for is that Coach Jordan's birthday is coming up. We're recording on a Thursday and the Saturday of the Georgia State game in the 2021 season. For those of you that maybe listen far off in the future, Clint always likes to obviously remind people, as many other people do, but he does, in my opinion, the best job out there of reminding you about Shug and his legacy and his history. And he's going to be making some social media posts out there that you're going to want to pay attention to on Saturday, especially when you're kind of getting ready for the football game. And things like that. So for this, I thought it would be fun for us to get together and just talk about things that you may or you may not know about Coach Shug Jordan. So I got to ask to start off, was this a hard list to come up with of just things that you might thought people would find interesting?
No. I mean, because I think Shug is a very interesting person. It's just trying to figure out, things that aren't very commonly known. To go a little bit deeper than just this is where he's from, this is where he was born, this is how he got his nickname and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not interested in the low-hanging fruit. Like, we're going to talk about the guy.
See, that's what I like about you, is I like going a little bit deeper than just, because I think some people tuned into this episode and like, oh, we're just going to talk about his record against this team, that team. And, some of that's interesting, but we like to go a step further here and just talk about what makes him this nebulous figure out there. Because for you and me, Clint, and our generation, Shug has unfortunately had been passed away for a long time. My dad, went to games, and he even told me a story about things were a lot more open back then, practices and such. He went down to the field level and told Coach Jordan himself, "I'm going to play for you someday," and he never did. But but it's a cool story to say my dad told Coach Jordan, "I'm going to play for you." So he's just this figurehead out there that I think we kind of, obviously for good reasons, for most, I would assume, put on a pedestal. Is it a fair statement to say that he is our Bear Bryant, or does that kind of take away from him kind of comparing him to Bear Bryant?
I don't think it's fair to say that, because I think that they both have such an incredible legacy that they need to stand on their own. Mm-hmm. I'm fine with saying he's our Shug Jordan. And
I love it.
I think that Auburn has been very lucky over the years, in the past 50, 60 years, to have incredible coaches and incredible men as the Auburn football coach. And, I know that our generation and maybe a slightly older generation really holds Coach Dye in really high regards, and rightfully so. But you and I are both so far removed from that Shug Jordan era. Like Shug died in 1980, well before you and I were even born. And it's such a sad thing because he had such an impact on Auburn, much more than I think just the common fan, especially those that are our age and younger. No.
It's something that I always want to learn more about. Just not just Shug's history, but Auburn's history. But his is so intertwined with Auburn that I think it's worthy of us doing this episode and maybe some more. We'll see how far we get into this list and these. It's not even like a top 10. I want to call it a top 10. It's just a list that we want to kind of talk about some things about Shug. And quick plug, by the way, because Clint reminded me of this. For those of you that are regular subscribers here, you'll know that we have the Auburn Roots podcast. You can find it here on the main feed, but it also has its own Auburn Roots exclusive feed. You can find it anywhere, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. There is an episode with Richard Stevens, who he and his father, were very well connected with Shug and his family. And his father was the one who did a lot of the post-game shows with Coach Jordan. So if you kind of want to hear a little bit about that type of stuff, go back and listen to that episode. I don't have that. I have a master list I usually hold in front of me for those shows when we're recording them, but I don't have it right now. But Richard Stevens' episode, it's a great one to go back and look about if you love things about Shug. All right, let's start off with this. I know it's not on your list technically, but we kind of brought it up. Jordan/Jordan, the debate. It's not really a debate, but like, what's the confusion here?
So I heard the story multiple times that when Coach Jordan would introduce himself, he would always say, "I'm Coach Shug Jordan." His wife, Evelyn, would always interrupt and say, "I'm Evelyn Jordan." So it was definitely part of his Southern Selma twang, but he always stuck to it. Like he would have spelt it J-E, or if he could have, but his wife, Evelyn, made sure that people knew that it was Jordan for her and Jordan for the head coach.
So to put this to bed, so to speak, and there's actually been other people that have gone into great detail about this type of stuff. I think, Jeremy Henderson's a great resource for these type of things too. It is technically spelled and phonetically spelled Jordan, but we go by what he called himself, and that was Coach Jordan. Is that the way to settle this debate?
Basically.
I love it, but to me that almost makes it more special because when people now, and it's fun to kind of have that debate with people come, especially visitors. They come, oh, it's Shug Jordan Stadium. And I'm like, no, please, sir, do not offend me.
Right. So when I was actually looking up some resources on this list, I went through my Twitter feed just to a quick and easy look at what I had shared in the past about Coach, and I had multiple tweets from the past that were, "You should not be allowed to enter the gates of Jordan-Hare Stadium if you can't pronounce it correctly. If you mispronounce Coach Jordan's surname, you are not allowed entry." And I still stand by that.
That's a fair, a qualification in a day and age. And I'm kind of being a little bit vague here with what I'm referring, but I think most of you would think where certain cards are required to get in certain places. That's our card for you to get into certain places, is you to be able to pronounce Jordan correctly. All right, well, let's how about this? You pick the first one off of your list that you want to mention about, and let's see where you want to go with this.
All right. Well, the first thing that I think that most people don't really understand is the pure athlete that Coach Jordan was. He studied at Auburn, and he didn't think he was good enough to get into Auburn or smart enough to get into Auburn. Growing up in a small town of Selma, and he wasn't the best student in the world. He'd be the first one to admit that. But he was a solid athlete. And by all accounts, he was going to be the guy that worked harder on the team than anybody else. He was going to work harder than anybody else that came up against him. And his record showed. He was a 3-sport athlete at Auburn. He played baseball, he played basketball, and he played football. And when you look at Coach Jordan, especially as an athlete, during his time as a student, he was not a big guy. He was a small kid, but he played center on the football team. And that's just not something you see. I mean, the offensive line and the defensive line are now named the Big Nasties. And that was not the case in the 1930s. And he's such an incredible athlete. He was actually named the most outstanding athlete in 1932. And it's just, he was a team captain on the basketball team. So again, as I was going through Twitter, I found this one note. In 1932, Auburn and Georgia Tech met on the hardwood. And back then they were called cagers, which is crazy to me. I just love like they used to play in a cage and they needed
cage match. No one leaves.
No, literally they needed to, because it was such a rough sport that they would tumble out into the crowd and audience members would get hurt. But the headline of this article from 1932 was Ralph Jordan held scoreless for only the second time in his career. And Auburn ended up winning. And this is the craziest thing about these old school basketball scores. Auburn won 25-22.
That's disappointing, I guess, by today's standards.
Oh no. Auburn had played in some like 12-8 games, some 14-9 games. And again, that's without a 3-point line. That is old school basketball at its finest. But
I'm wondering what their field goal percentage was actually now. I'm really trying to do those numbers in my head.
It's not very good, I can promise you that. But he played center on the football team. He was a guard on the basketball team, and he was a pitcher on the baseball. You just know, like, again, team captain on basketball. I believe he was a team captain on the football team as well, and super well respected as a player. Just people loved Shug, from the coaches to the opponents to the writers to the fans. Everybody knew who he was, and everybody loved Lefty.
Everybody loved Lefty. So really, this love that we have for Coach Jordan now, since his passing and beyond, really began back then. And I think part of the reason that you could see that the love is so great for him now and back then is because he basically was Auburn. Like he did everything. He's the jack of all trades. And like you said, grew up in a different time where, obviously the big nasties weren't really making up the offensive line. I think back to my playing days, because, I played a little ball. Our offensive linemen, by most standards, were tiny. Now, granted, I went to a little private school in high school, but, it's kind of made me feel like we were back in the old times where some of these scrawny, tall guys were offensive linemen just because they had longer arms and maybe could stop someone from getting to our quarterback by holding them. If we had certain SEC refs. I'm not going there. But baseball, basketball, and football, is there another sport that you would have expected him to play other than the big three?
No, I don't think so. As I was going through the notes and just trying to re-educate myself on Jordan's life, like, Bo ran track as his third sport instead of basketball. And I guess I confused myself on that, but also, like, everybody ran track at that time. Everybody still runs track, but it's like I expected a third or a fourth sport to be track, but he just loved competing. He was such a competitive guy, and I feel like I need to give a shout out to this book. It's called The Life and Times of Auburn's Ralph Shug Jordan, and it's a biography by Rich Donnell, and it's been 2 or 3 years since I've read it, but it is such a great inside look into his life, and especially his early life. I learned a lot about Coach Jordan reading that book, and how he loved to play sports, how he was always active. He spent so much of his time growing up in Selma at the local YMCA, to the point that they actually named it after him. And I mean, he was one of the guys that you would never catch indoors. He was always outside.
Well, and that's probably a lesson that some of us today, some of our younger generations today, could take a lesson from while they sit inside on their phones. And I do too.
As we sit inside and record a podcast.
That's besides the point, Clint. I do want to go back for a second, though, because there is a sport that I feel like I associate with him somehow, but I have no reason to. You want to take a guess at what that might be? Not a traditional one. Any guess?
Not a traditional sport. No, I don't have a guess.
Wrestling.
I
don't know why.
I can see where you get that, but no, I don't believe he ever wrestled.
Well, and that's the thing too, is because you talked about the differentiation. We know Shug mainly as those images of him as the coach, and he was obviously probably, I'm just kind of guessing here, got a bit of a dad bod and things like that, but he was fitter and he was in shape and not scrawny, but just a different body build back then. So he's well suited to play baseball, basketball, and football. But I associate with him that type of look that he had. And so that's why I kind of associate wrestling with it's why when we talk about baseball for him, I was shocked that he was a pitcher, because I would think catcher, because those tend to have a little bit more meat on their bones in terms of that, because they need to be able to block the plate and stuff like that and have a little bit of power behind them. Basketball, I'm not shocked at, because I've known that he's been a great basketball athlete for most of the time that I've known history about him and things like that. And of course, you associate football with him. But you brought up that he's a Selma boy. I felt like I knew that fact, but does Selma have any other really big names out there besides Shug coming out of their little town?
That's a great question. I don't believe so. Let's check online and check Wikipedia.
Well, obviously Selma has a lot of history beside, but okay. I'm talking about people like that actually are from there. And I feel like there's a big name out there that we're missing. And
so there's a couple of names on this list that I was not aware of. So probably one of your favorite players, one of my parents' favorites, just because of how fun it is to pronounce, Ben Obumanu.
Oh, yes. I forgot Ben was from there.
But guess this name, I had no idea was even from Alabama, let alone Selma. Mia Hamm.
That is a bit shocking. I knew she was from Alabama, but I didn't know it was Little Selma, Alabama.
And how did they let her go to North Carolina?
Well, because we probably weren't known as well for soccer back then. I'm thinking of Auburn, but obviously, why did Alabama let them go to North Carolina as well? When you're a talent like that, people just drag you away out of Alabama.
I had no idea that she was from Alabama.
The more you know. We're learning new things, even on the Shug Jordan episode. But Little Selma, Alabama is hometown to Shug Jordan. Now, do you know if there's anything like named for him there other than the YMCA, or is that kind of just his main claim to fame there?
I have no idea. I've
kind of
honestly
cool,
never been to Selma. The Y was named after him when he was still alive, so it's that building might not still be there anymore, and who knows if it still carries his name. But there's got to be some sort of plaque or monument to him. But I was going to say, I think he's buried out there, but I know that he's buried in Auburn.
A little bit of an assignment for myself, but listeners who want to, beat me to it, I want someone out in Selma to send me a picture of the YMCA. If you can find the plaque, bonus points. What you win, my congratulations. But that's my assignment for you all out there. Go find that YMCA if it's still standing, even if it's not even technically open to the public. I want to see this, because I think those are cool things to just point to and say, yeah, all this stuff in Auburn would should associate him. He's got a giant, football coliseum named after him. But here's something small about you didn't know about the man that I think is pretty cool.
Hey Auburn fans, I want to take a quick timeout from this episode to bring your attention to something very special. Here at the E2C Network, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best content for Auburn fans out there. And best of all, it's free to you. But just because it's free doesn't mean there aren't costs, especially when you have a library of hundreds of podcasts, videos, blogs, and more. Many of you have reached out and asked how you can support this network in the past. Well, now I have your answer. It's called the E2C Network Booster Club over at patreon.com/E2C Network. There you'll find a membership monthly reward system where you can sign up for as little as $1 and get different perks at different tiers. Some of those perks include things such as apparel, eligibility to join us on future podcasts, recognition as an E2C Network booster, exclusive communications, and bonus content that is available nowhere else. If you love this network and want to help us keep producing podcasts like this one, please head on over to patreon.com/E2C Network to join the E2C Network Booster Club. You can also get there by going to our website, e2cnetwork.com/support. Whether you decide to join or not, we are still so appreciative that you would support us by just listening and being here, because each and every one of you is part of our E2C Network family. Well, that's it. Timeout's over. Let's get back into the episode.
Talk about how you got his nickname, Shug, because that's one of those things. Why do you call him Shug Jordan, not Ralph Jordan? Where did he get the name?
Shug loved sugar cane.
I do too. Do I get named Shug now?
No, specifically sorghum.
Yeah.
I don't know. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Sorghum, yep.
So apparently that has a very high sugar content. And I'm guessing that was probably a very popular crop of Selma in the 20s and 30s. And he was just always seen eating sugar.
I mean, again, I feel like Shug and I are cut from the same cloth, because I've got a stash of candy down there that Jessica doesn't know about and she's not allowed to touch. So, don't worry, she's got her own too, and it's twice the size of mine. I found it, but I leave it reserved for her over there. But think about like growing up in this time, obviously no electronics, things like that. They've got a lot of energy to burn. So probably even if he did consume a lot of sugarcane or sorghum, he's burning that off, simply just from being outdoors and being the type of athlete that he was. But it makes sense. Shug. I wonder, do you think he liked the name Shug?
I absolutely think he did, because I don't think he ever used his first name other than just on legal documents. I think he introduced himself as Shug. Because I mean, if you are the kind of person that Shug Jordan was in Auburn in the 70s, you had the power to have people stop calling you Shug.
Yeah.
And he didn't. And that is how people knew him. That is how people still referred to him. And, I think when you see Ralph or even James Ralph Jordan, like, that doesn't ring a bell. You have to call him by Shug. And I think he knew that.
So the other thing I always thought about when I was growing up, I'd hear the name Ralph Shug Jordan or just Shug Jordan, and I would try to figure out, I knew it was his nickname. It wasn't his real name. I tried to figure out, it can't be as simple as sugar. Did you have something that you like kind of associated the Shug with, or did you just know that right away that that's what it stood for? Why he went by that name?
I figured it was Shug for sugar. But unfortunately, that's exactly what it is. It's not some grand story like Paul Bryant wrestling a bear. And, it's not the best story in the world. A nickname story should be pretty decent. And this one's just blood sugar. But
well, I don't know that it is.
I think that it speaks to who he was more than anything. I think
it's not a tall tale like Bear Bryant. This is who the guy was. See, I had somehow in my mind worked around this concept that he like ran the ball so sweet. That's why they called him Shug, because that felt like an expression they would use back then. Man, his runs were so sweet that he would just call him Shug.
Except he was a sinner, bro.
I know. But this is, I'm talking about, young Kyle hearing these stories from his dad, and like, okay, that's why it is. It's not sugar. It's not because he loved sugar like me. We don't have that in common, but clearly we do. You are not as different. All of us out there, I'm sure, who love to eat things that are very sugary, much different from Coach Jordan as well. What's the next thing you want to bring up about him?
So I love this fact, because I didn't realize that his tenure at Auburn would have overlapped with this other person at Auburn. But Coach Jordan was such a history buff, and he studied history under the father of Auburn football, Dr. George Petrie. Petrie was actually a mentor, a life mentor for Coach Jordan at times. And, I think when you look at the time frame, like the Auburn Creed was credited to be written, in the 1940s, 1945. And Coach Jordan he graduated from Auburn in 1932. So you can definitely see the overlap, but I just never, imagine that those two would cross paths. And not only did they cross paths, like they were a big part of each other's lives.
Yeah, and I think the disconnect sometimes comes from, because you see, for us, our generation, images and videos of Shug, and it's old, but we still, like I even said, I've got connections with my dad and, seeing and actually speaking to Coach Jordan. So it's kind of like it's far away enough where it's kind of legendary, but it's still feels within reach. But then you go to George Petrie and you see, those old timey pictures and those like get ups and stuff like that. And you're like, you can't even like connect with it at all because it's
Well, and
such
I
a
think
different
that's a good
time.
point. And there just aren't many photos of Dr. Petrie, unfortunately. But the first Auburn football game was 1893,
Oh, man.
and then Petrie is still around in 1945, and I think he died shortly after that. But yeah, it's just those kind of dates are so hard to connect to. The school was founded in 1856. The school opened in 1859. Football was played in 1893, and then Shug in 1930s is
Yeah.
in the same place, and they're in the same place, same time, and it's still mind blowing for me to realize that.
They're like two big bridges that kind of span almost time, for Auburn history. You've got or pillars, I guess would be a great way to say. And that's why we kind of talk about, some of the great coaches in Auburn history. George Petrie comes up, and, his record is not outstanding just in terms of sheer numbers because they didn't play a lot as compared to what we do now. But he was the first Auburn football coach in essence and started the first team. So you've got George Petrie, then you've kind of got there's Mike Donahue in there, but then you come to Shug Jordan and his tenure here and how long he was here and just became. I always struggle. Do you consider him like the grandfather, the father of Auburn football? Like, how do you balance that with the discussion of Mike Donahue, George Petrie, and like those three? How do you kind of space that out?
That's a really good question. Right before we got on, I was thinking, like, if Petrie's the father, then what does that make Coach Jordan?
Yeah.
And so I had that thought earlier, and I don't have an answer for you. What Petrie did for Auburn, what Donahue did for Auburn, what Heisman did for Auburn,
Right.
what Jordan did for Auburn, and what every other coach has done. It's incredible. It's,
Right.
When you think about, we take it for granted of what we have today in terms of the level of college football that we have today, that we have 100 games on TV at any given point, and that we have 100,000 seat stadiums, and what we had when Coach Jordan was there. I actually did write this one down because I thought this was crazy. Jordan Hare tripled in capacity while Coach Jordan was head coach.
Oh, that's a cool one.
When he started, it was a 21,000 seat stadium in 1951.
Jeez.
In 1975, when he retired, it was up to 61,000. And since then, we've added 20,000 seats more.
With plans, if they ever come to fruition, to add even more. So take that into your perspective as well.
It's crazy to think that he didn't get to see the modern edition of his stadium either.
So
the west side upper deck was not finished until I think 87, 7 years after he had passed. And I couldn't tell you when the east upper deck was finished, but it was probably like late 70s, early 80s. So there's a chance that he never even saw it grow to what it is today.
I think this would be a good conversation for maybe us to round out this show because, like we said, we gave you a tease. This is something we plan to maybe do again in the future. So if you like these type of episodes, let us know because this is, it's fun for me. I know it's fun for Clint because he loves this type of stuff as much as anybody out there. But what do you think Coach Jordan would say about his stadium now? The arena, not the arena. Well, I guess in some ways he saw that kind of change too over time. Not the Auburn Arena, but the Coliseum. But Jordan Hare Stadium, what bears his name. Try to put yourself in his shoes from where it came from, where you just talked about it, what he saw the changes go through himself and where it stands now. What do you think he would say or think about it?
I think he would be so incredibly humbled to see what Auburn has become and what his legacy has become. Again, this kid grew up in Selma, Alabama, which today is not a very wealthy area. And I can't imagine it was much better off 100 years ago. But to come to Auburn, to see the campus probably more than triple in size itself, to see the stadium that dons his name as large as it is, to see the players that have come. Coach Jordan never got to see Bo Jackson play.
Wow. Okay. Now
at all.
you just sent chills down my spine. Like I know that in my mind, but that's crazy that
It,
you can't say those two ever cross paths.
they never. Well,
We can't say that
I can't
officially.
imagine that they've ever crossed paths.
Right.
Coach Jordan was, fighting leukemia his last year on Earth, and that would put Bo Jackson as what, a sophomore or junior in high school.
Yeah.
So there's a chance, but I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
And but we can definitively say that Ralph Jordan never saw Bo Jackson in orange and blue, never saw him on the field at his stadium, never saw that number 34 run the ball. And it's just, I think he would be incredibly humbled to see where Auburn is today. The football program, the people, the university, and the town that surrounds it. People talk about Auburn being unrecognizable today. Imagine what this guy thought or would think.
Because he saw a lot of change himself. And I think humility is a great way to say that, because that's what we know of him, being this quiet strength. For the longest time, I think it was in the media room or the team meeting room, there was that poster that stood quiet strength.
Right.
And I think that's what he epitomized and why he's such an incredible figure in Auburn history. And I think humility is a great way to approach the way he would look at his, in essence, he wouldn't see it that way, but his football stadium. And I also stand here and think, you see the other cathedrals out there. Auburn in the 2021 season just got done playing in one of the biggest around, Beaver Stadium up in Happy Valley for Penn State. And I wonder, does he think we still could be further along, or is he happy with the way it is? And part of me thinks he is.
I would agree with that, because my sense of Coach Jordan is, he's not one of those guys to keep up with the Joneses. Money was not everything to him. He saw the darkest days of man serving in World War II, having been on the beaches of Normandy for D-Day. He saw the hell that war brought to the world, and he was humbled by that. And he did not like to speak about that. And, that does something to somebody. You really understand what is meaningful in life when you go through something like that. And Coach Jordan loved his family. He loved his children. He loved his wife. He loved his city. And knowing that Auburn is not the biggest stadium in the world probably doesn't even matter to him.
It doesn't matter to him for many reasons, because obviously the things that you talked about. But I think, for him, Auburn wasn't about being and I know this sounds oxymoronic, being the best, because you always want to try to be the best. You want to try for that. You want to strive for that.
Coach Jordan wanted to be the best that he could be. And he saw that Auburn was the best place for him to do just that. He did not come to Auburn to be the greatest football player in the world, or the greatest football coach in the world, or turn Auburn into the greatest football powerhouse in the world. It was much more simple. He wanted to play football. He wanted to grow up as a better man. He wanted to teach other men how to be an Auburn man. And that's what it means to be a coach. That's what it means to be a Shug Jordan.
And not to be a bit of a Debbie Downer. It feels like we've lost a little bit of that within the Auburn family in recent years. I think we could use a little bit of Shug back in our lives to remind us of where our roots are and where we've come from. So anyway, listen, I've had chills a couple times already in this episode. This has been fun. Again, if you guys like this type of content, we will give you more of it. We've already kind of discussed in the background here, maybe doing this on the anniversary of his birthday every year. We haven't even hit half of the stuff that Clint just kind of jotted down. So if you want more of this sooner, let us know. But we'll probably at least do this again on the anniversary of his birthday next year, God willing. But appreciate you guys. Want to hear your perspectives on everything that we shared here, any stories related to that, and that assignment's out there. Again, all you get is my congratulations. But if someone can get me a picture of the YMCA in Selma with the plaque or some commemorative thing, you will forever be indebted. No, I will be indebted, but only you. I'm trying to figure out a way to sell this, but I feel like I need to stop.
Stop.
Anyway, Clint, before you get out of here, share where you can be found on the social medias, and if they want to follow you to learn more about history and aesthetics and all that stuff?
You can always check me out on auburnuniforms.com. You can follow me on Twitter at ClintAU24 and check out the Auburn Uniform database on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Auburn Uniforms. And we'll be celebrating Coach Jordan's birthday this Saturday.
You can find me on Twitter at TigerEye24. Until we talk to you again, thank you for listening to War Eagle.
War Eagle.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by E2CNetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.